Starting yesterday, unemployment benefits were stopped for most Americans. And also, we also got the latest jobs numbers that do not look good for the month of August. And so I don't know if this is whether, symbolic or ironic or tragic, but yesterday on Labor Day, unemployment benefits related to COVID-19, the extra $300 a week, were cut across the entire country. 9.2 million people were receiving benefits from either the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program or the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. But it affects way more than 9.2 million people. According to the census data, the average household that was receiving unemployment benefits had 3.8 members in it. So 35 million people in total live in households that will no longer be receiving unemployment benefits as of today. Economists and others in the Biden administration are justifying these cuts by pointing to strong job growth and recovery over the last few months. But something strange is happening in the economy right now. There are reportedly 10 million job openings, but still almost 9 million people unemployed. For some, the obvious answer is that unemployment benefits kept people who could have easily found a job from going back to work. But that theory misses the real dynamics of what's going on here. We can look at the 20 states that cut the extra $300 a week in unemployment benefits back in June. These states had the same pace of hiring as the other states that kept benefits until now. There are a combination of factors at work here. One that has gotten a lot of coverage, even in the mainstream media, is the way the pandemic has made many workers rethink their careers. So for many people, their lives were kind of put on pause by COVID. Maybe many reflected that it's simply not worth risking their lives to go back to work to a terrible job with bad pay and benefits. Maybe they enjoyed the extra time they got with their family during the pandemic and decided they need a job that could keep that in place. So it's hard to precisely quantify this dynamic. There is some data that can give us a picture. A recent article in the Washington Post showed that resignations are the highest on record, up 13% over pre-pandemic levels. There are 4.9 million more people who aren't working or looking for work than there were before the pandemic. There's a surge in retirements with 3.6 million people retiring during the pandemic, or more than 2 million more than expected. And there's been a boost in entrepreneurship that has caused the biggest jump in years in new business applications. There are also signs that workers have had enough of incredibly demanding jobs that were pushed to the brink because of COVID-19. Take healthcare workers and teachers. These two occupations were already difficult before COVID and often are not given proper support and respect. In recent months, healthcare workers and educators have quit their jobs at the highest rate on record, going back to 2002. And while nurses and teachers have been always underpaid, most of them certainly won't be eager to jump into new jobs paying $12 an hour. But having said all this, it's simply not true that there aren't millions of people out there actively looking for work and can't find them. From the same Washington Post article, this story of a warehouse worker I think is particularly revealing and worth quoting at length. So the article says, while companies say they are struggling to find workers, many unemployed say that they are having trouble getting hired, especially if they haven't worked for a year. Forklift driver Brandon Harvey and his wife used to work in a warehouse outside Atlanta that closed during the pandemic and never reopened. Harvey, who's 33, searched for a job for months, looking online and driving around South Fulton. He submitted countless applications but rarely got calls back. He said, I fear that employers are pretty hesitant to give you an opportunity right now if you haven't worked in a while, Harvey said over the summer when his search seemed especially frustrating. Goes on, Harvey and his wife fell behind on rent. Their landlord wanted to evict them. They struggled to stay positive in front of their two kids, a toddler and a 13-year-old. Harvey saw plenty of $10 and $12 an hour jobs all spring and summer, but it wouldn't be enough for his family to survive. He made $17 an hour before the pandemic. I definitely wasn't going to work for $10 or $12 an hour. That wasn't going to do anything, Harvey said. And this encapsulates so much of what is wrong and what is driving current unemployment issues. Yes, there are many businesses out there that want to and need to hire people, but it would be incorrect and frankly naive to assume that as a whole, employers should be relied on to fully solve the issue of employment. They hold most of the cards and they want to bring workers back on their own terms. Yes, some employers are offering incentives for workers to come back, including better pay and benefits, The average pay of workers has actually gone up 2.8% in the past 5 months, which is the fastest rate of increase, believe it or not, since 1981. But it's still not happening on a broad enough scale or in a coordinated way to get at the heart of the issue. And this seems like a perfect time for congressional Democrats and the president to force the issue on $15 an hour minimum wage, with federal subsidies for small businesses that truly could not pay that. But instead, the strategy has been to force working people into enough misery so that they will be forced to accept what employers are willing to give. But there's already evidence that this won't work, even on its own terms. We saw in June when 20 states eliminated the extra $300 a week in unemployment benefits. These states had virtually the same pace of hiring as other states that kept these extra benefits. Some companies have used this time to accelerate automation and cost cutting that has reduced the need for their workers. And there's also something particularly bad about the timing of this decision to cut unemployment benefits. We are in the midst of another COVID-19 surge, with hospitalizations at their highest since late last January. This, of course, is and will continue to have an effect on the economy. In August, only 235,000 jobs were added, and that headline is making the rounds today. We can only predict that this would get worse as people's purchasing power declines without the extra income of unemployment benefits. Cutting unemployment benefits cannot hide or somehow evade the structural problems in our economy. Instead of the federal government seeing its role as an institution that can create quality jobs in the form of a jobs guarantee or massive public works project, it is only playing a role in forcing working people back into the hands of the market. As we've seen before, and as we continue to see, this just simply doesn't work. And Kale, what are your thoughts here? This is making the news rounds again. This issue has come up before, but I think this kind of reminds me, the recent conversation we had with Luke Savage about liberals, where I feel like they're refusing to accept that there are real structural issues in the economy, putting COVID aside, and they really feel like, we could just get back to the old economy and that would have been fine. But I think they're missing the point.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm really glad you covered this. I think the allusion to Luke Savage's interview makes a lot of sense. And part of the problem is just that we're living through two things simultaneously. I mean, we're living through a lot of things, but two things worth kind of connecting mentally. The global pandemic, where, as we all know, like it's reshaped a lot of how work actually looks and how people go into work, what people do for work. But at the same time, it's also meant we're in a period where capital just has so much control with no real challenge from anything. There is no strong militant labor movement that can force employers to come to some agreement over these very basic and necessary concerns that workers have. And then the state is also not in a position to actually discipline capitalists in any way of coming down and saying, sorry, you're just going to have to deal with this new arrangement whereby we actually are going to look out for working people. And there's a number of reasons for that. Part of that is just the bottlenecks that have happened in Congress because of the particular electoral outcomes and having people like Manchin and Sinema. But it's also just the fact that at this point, capital can get away with almost anything, in the sense that no one has anything that can discipline them, whereas capital can, of course, always come back and discipline politicians. And they obviously every single day discipline their workers to, to tell them, don't even try fighting back. It's not worth it. And obviously I don't mean to be fatalist about this. It's not, it's not necessarily always going to be like this, but we are stuck in there's this dual grinding action happening between the pandemic, making it that much more strenuous on working people. Mm-hmm. And then, just there is no one's coming in to save us all from the power of capital. Not even, I mean, it's truly a free for all where, it's capital against capital, and we're all just, getting, we're just the ones getting hit in the crossfire.
Right. And what's kind of interesting about this, in a way, workers have slightly more leverage right now. I mean, and you're hearing some people talk about this. Although, having said that, I really bristle when I've heard this thing called a low key general strike. Really bristle at that. But, there's a little bit of a point here that like workers have a little bit of leverage when there's a shortage. And again, I cited the figure that actually many employers are like offering slightly better wages, better benefits. But I think it is an open question of like how much can people beyond in their individual situations take advantage of this. Maybe in certain sectors, like some of the already heavily unionized sectors are also experiencing shortages. Some of the non-union sectors are. Maybe this would spur more organizing in certain industries where they have a little bit of leverage. But we shouldn't expect that it's automatically going to translate to workers having more power or being able to take advantage of this like temporary leverage. But that's something to be seen in the future. But it's pretty clear that Democrats were kind of banking on, all right, we're going to get through COVID quickly, fairly quickly. Everything's going to rebound. Now things are getting dicey. That this thing is lingering. It's having effects on the economy. We're seeing Biden's approval numbers going down. Not that we should like get too lost in the horse race. But I think now it's like things are getting dicier again for them.
Yeah, and I think it's worth just at any chance we can to restate the fact that like there's a very real economic reason why employers won't just tolerate the state coming in and offering extra employment. That it's not the case that employers are can operate over here on one side and do what they want with their employees, and then let the state over here on the other side start employing people, because from their point of view it ends up becoming kind of a glut on the system. It gums up competition for them, for especially competition amongst workers, which they may not think of it in these specific direct terms, but this is effectively like what capitalists, what corporations are worried about is their employees having greater structural leverage, because there's now a new offering available to them where they don't have to accept the below starvation wages. They don't have to accept the like cruel and inhumane working conditions, because now there's another option where they can all go over to state employment that is in fact and this would have to be enacted in such a way, but
Right.
is ideally enacted in a way where it actually is providing a living wage, that is providing safe working conditions, and ideally should have greater worker power and control within the workplace.
Yeah.
And if that exists over here, it's going to force capitalists to make greater concessions to their own employees. And so they're never going to come out in favor of a jobs guarantee or any kind of federal employment. It's just antithetical to their objective of making profits.
Right. Yeah, and that point you raised, is something I said about this. The times cry out for a federal job guarantee, and the economist and writer Pavlina Cherneva has written a lot about how a federal job guarantee can work. And one of the benefits, again, is what you said, is it would actually help pull up the standards in the private sector. This is actually something that unions do as well. Many employers, they make a calculation. Well, we want to prevent the union. In order to do that, we're going to raise wages a little bit because we know other unions in this region have higher wages. So it helps bring everybody up. But this kind of also points to the limits, all this talk about Biden and how he kind of surprised us a little bit early with his, big spending. But I think it kind of shows the limits of like, they really weren't going to ever consider going much beyond the short-term emergency spending. I think even the decision that, we just need to cut unemployment benefits off now, even if COVID is resurging, it doesn't matter. I think just shows that they are holding strong to that ideology that they have around this. And I don't think they ever plan to go that much further in terms of intervening in capital in any way.
I want to give maybe a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and say that it seemed like when the Biden administration came in, there was some internal within the administration, some push towards kind of some revival of welfare state programs, of taking care of those people that have been so like devastatingly hit, or just like their lives destroyed from the pandemic, or made that much more strenuous. And I do think there was an effort, and maybe there wasn't, but like just for the sake of argument, let's say there was. It just speaks to the composition of power in the country, that like even when you have Democrats in control of the government, even when it seems like the executive branch is willing to move in that direction, where Biden is saying I support the PRO Act and would sign the PRO Act if it came on my desk. Business, even in somewhat of a more disorganized position right now, where corporations and capitalists aren't super organized at the moment in the way that they have been in the past, they can still successfully shut down these efforts. And that's where we talked to Sirota the other day. I mean, like they're doing everything they can to rip apart the infrastructure bill, so it's just those things that would like be useful and beneficial to them making a profit, and nothing else. Nothing to do with taking care of workers living standards, or the infrastructure that provides. I hate the way that they've put this as like there's the the serious infrastructure over here, and then there's kind of like this soft social infrastructure that it would be nice to have, but can't ask for too much, where it's like the soft social stuff is like it's the critical things that like make a society functioning and livable for most people. And so
and part of this shows too, I mean, capital and how they're pursuing their very, very short-term interests. It kind of reveals that they don't have much ability or foresight or will to prevent the rise of the far right, because I think it can be realized that if we got to take care of some basic things to kind of keep things from really going off the rails in this country even more. And we're starting to hear the rumors swirling already about whether Trump will run again. I mean, if the economy is really starting to tank again, I think those fears could become much even more realistic about what is the far right going to look like in another time of crisis. And it's like capital can't even realize that, or maybe they do realize it or don't care, but they just can't. You cannot be a reliable ally in defeating the far right.
Well, in the business community after the January 6th Capitol riot, a lot of kind of the key instruments of the business community, kind of the face of it, things like the Chamber of Commerce, came out and said, like, we're not going to be donating to Republicans who basically carry on with this, whatever this, to however you want to understand this like the support of the riots, the support of Trump, of Trumpism, of kind of this defying of like the basic integrity of like democratic capitalism, as undemocratic as our democratic capitalism is. But they said, we're not going to be donating money to these Republicans if they keep this up. And they had to reverse that decision by March, because they realized like the party is not, they don't care. Like the Republicans in office realize the only way you get reelected in this country as a Republican at this point is by Trumpism. Like that, there is no other option for them, like politically speaking. And so that's the situation where it's kind of these disparate elements that just cannot coexist. And obviously, the liberals, just taking it back to where you started with this, Luke's interview on liberals today. I think to face all of this, to face like the power of business and the electoral, ensnarement, I guess that we're in, it basically you have to deal with basic questions of political ownership, of economic ownership, of like who actually controls the economy, because there's no other way to get out of this mess. Like it's been built by like the victories of capital over labor, of like the retrenchment of the work of the labor movement. And these are all kind of the the horrible monsters that come out when you're in a situation that where it's just capitalist against capitalist, just
Right.
like capitalist competition, and everyone else just getting
Yeah.
stuck on the battlefield.
Yeah, and I think it'd be interesting to see how moments like this accelerate certain trends. I mean, and I'm thinking about automation, for example. And, in one way, sometimes I get annoyed by the way people talk about automation because, like, they can't get out of this mode of thinking about it like a sci-fi movie. And it gets too over the top. I mean, since the late '60s, they've been talking about robots taking over the world, and it's not going to happen like that. But having said that, automation is real. It's becoming more and more of a problem. And some companies have taken this time during COVID, I mean, and used that to accelerate automation, which is going to have very long-term effects on employment. And that was going to be increasing anyway, whether COVID was here or not. So I think it's like we've been, now that when things lift from COVID, it's almost like a kind of a new world is going to be revealed a little bit, full of contradictions. And again, it's like, are most liberals willing to face those contradictions head on, or pretend to be living like in a past that is no longer here anymore?
Yeah, and well, and the other thing with automation is just that I think part of the problem is when it's treated as kind of this autonomous process that it just it is like a sci-fi movie where the creatures from Mars have brought down automation onto all of us, and now we're stuck with this awful process, and it'll come and it'll go. We'll see it every few years, but like it just is the automation is it's the name of the game in the system, where it's companies necessarily at war with other companies, and the only way that you get a leg up, the only way that you make a profit is by relatively being more competitive, of having of cheapening your inputs, of maximizing your profits, and having greater technology or technical means in order to accomplish
Right.
that. And so it's like it's here, it's always been here. And again, to really deal with it, you're going to have to deal with like the basic questions of just unrestrained capitalist competition.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.